Welcome to Exploring A Course in Miracles. I'm Emily Bennington with the Circle of Atonement, and I'm here with Circle founder Robert Perry. And today we are in part 2 of our 6-part series on the 10 traits of the spiritually advanced. If you're new to this series, there's a section in the Manual for Teachers of A Course in Miracles called What Are the Characteristics of God's Teachers? And Robert and I are diving into each one of them over the next 6 weeks. In our last podcast, we covered trust, and this week we are going to be covering honesty and tolerance. So, Robert, before we get started, is there anything that you want to say to frame us up on these 2 traits?
I think that we should mention that trust that we covered last week is defined as trust in the world, meaning what happens in the world, in the belief that it's all governed by the Holy Spirit, by a benevolent power. And we should say that these 10 characteristics are, which you've kind of already said, but they're the 10 characteristics of the truly advanced. You know, these are the kinds of people that traditionally would have been called saints.
High bar, for sure.
Very high bar.
Yeah.
And it's not that we don't all have some of these traits. It's just that the extreme version that the description, contains of them is very advanced.
Yeah, that's what comes to mind when you read through these traits. It's like we have our setting for honesty, for example, and we'll get into this, but what Jesus does is he takes that default setting that we think is honest and turns the dial all the way up to something that's just radical honesty.
Yeah,
so
well said.
Given our first trait is honesty that we'll be discussing today, I guess a good place to start would be, how does the Course define honesty?
One thing I think is good to say at the start is that rather than a couple of options we might imagine the Course says honesty doesn't matter because it's all part of the illusion. We might imagine the Course says, yep, be honest, that's a good thing. But what it does instead is it goes all the way to the extreme and intensifies honesty.
Yeah, it even says perfect honesty, and it uses that term, the Course uses that term perfect honesty 6 times overall, and 2 of those 6 appear in this very section. So let's talk about that. What does he mean by perfect honesty?
Okay, why don't we just go ahead and read, I'll just go ahead and read the definition of honesty that's given in the section, and we will see exactly why perfect honesty is such an appropriate term. So he starts out by saying, honesty does not apply only to what you say. It does apply to what you say, but not only what you say. And I just want to add in here that this is true even in dictionary definitions of honesty, where we are told that honesty also refers to uprightness of character or moral virtue. So it does not apply only to what you say. The term actually means consistency, he says. There is nothing you say that contradicts what you think or do. No thought opposes any other thought. No act belies your word. And your word has the connotation here, I think, of what you say you'll do. So no act, but you keep your word. And no word lacks agreement with another. So that's the list.
I love that idea that honesty actually means consistency. And it's hard for us to imagine the kind of honesty that he's talking about here. He's talking about harmony between all of your thoughts, all of your deeds, all of your words. And that means your deeds match your words match your thoughts match your deeds. And that is
your thoughts match each other.
Your thoughts match each other. And that's just, I think, first of all, it's an amazing idea. I mean, who wouldn't want to live that way, where you would just go through the world floating almost. I think where we get stuck is that we think we're honest. We want to be honest,
Mm-hmm.
but then we get into all this conflict. Like our thoughts don't match what we're doing. We may think we're being honest, but we're doing dishonest things. We are saying something, but it's different than what's going on in our head. And we're just a mess up there.
Mm-hmm.
And it's that kind of inconsistency in our own thinking that causes us to be what the Course would say, dishonest, right?
Yeah. And it shows just what a high bar he's setting here, because from our standpoint, as long as we say what's true, we're good. But here we have to not only say what's true, but even all of our different thoughts have to agree with each other. And that's just getting started.
And that's the hard part, because oftentimes it's like we're thinking one thing and doing another. And what we're doing is the honest thing, but we're almost kind of being drug into it, because what we really want to do is like hold that grievance, or, we're thinking something different about somebody than our behaviors display. I mean, again, I feel like I'm repeating myself, and I am, but it's just, we're a mess. Like, we are really a conflicted mess in our own minds. And the kind of harmony that he's talking about between our deeds and our words, and our words and our thoughts, and our thoughts and our deeds. I mean, my goodness, who wouldn't want to live that way?
Well, clearly none of us want to.
Or we wouldn't be so conflicted.
Right. Yeah. I think the outcome, and we'll talk later about, the result, is incredibly desirable. It's just that we don't want to pay the price to get that result.
Yeah, well, that sounds pretty juicy. So we'll get into that in a minute. But the footnote of this section, and it's a short little section on honesty, as we go through this series, we're hoping that you listening are in the manual for teachers and reading along with us. But the footnote for this section talks about integrity, and it's described as kind of like an ultra integrity. So what does ultra integrity mean to you, and how does that relate to the kind of honesty he's talking about here?
Yeah, so I think a couple things the first thing to point out is that integrity has two very common definitions, and they're both relevant here. So the first definition is the quality of being honest and having strong moral principles. So on that level, integrity and honesty are basically synonyms. Okay. But the second definition of integrity, like when you think of the integrity of a system, maybe a mechanical system, the second definition is the state of being whole and undivided. Well, we've just learned that this way he's describing honesty is really a state where all your thoughts, words, and deeds are whole and undivided. So both of those usual meanings of integrity apply directly to what he's describing as honesty here. And what that means is it might get us closer in terms of how it sounds to our ear, to, rather than saying perfect honesty, saying instead ultra integrity, being ultra honest, having ultra strong moral principles, and having the whole constellation of thoughts, words, and deeds being whole and undivided. So ultra integrity.
I think that's something that feels like we can aspire to. Perfect honesty feels a little hard, because when your friend comes up to you and they say, "What do you think of this?" and you're like, "I'm not really sure. They bet you doing each other the truth because she's invested."
Right.
So we have all these like instances where perfect honest, we're making a choice to not be perfectly honest because we don't want to pay the price for that. Right. Whether it's some kind of condemnation or scorn that comes back on us for telling the truth, or just hurting someone's feelings because, they want to be told that the thing they're asking you about is pretty or good or whatever. Yeah. So perfect honesty seems really hard. Ultra integrity, that feels more doable. That feels like something that we should be thinking about each day. Like, am I living my life with ultra integrity?
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, I like that.
Do you want to say anything more about that, or?
No, I think that I think perfect honesty sounds attractive. I think that we always pick the examples of, when someone asks you if they look fat in this outfit, you don't want to hurt their feelings. But I think the really important choices when it comes to honesty are all the places where we tell either lies or half truths or white lies, basically to get our own needs met, to keep ourselves protected and to get our way in the world. That's the stuff that I think we should be thinking about rather than, do I look fat in this outfit?
Right. I've heard, I don't know this is true, I don't have any direct experience, but I've heard of course communities where the goal is no private thoughts. And
Mhm.
so the idea is that if you're thinking it, you just say it. And I can't imagine anything that would like stir up conflict easier than like we need to have private thoughts, because if what's going on up there spills out, it can create a tremendous amount of conflict. So perfect honesty, I think, is an amazing concept, but ultra integrity just to me feels more touchable, reachable
Has
for
the
us.
right ring to it, maybe.
Yeah. So just moving on, this section opens, the section on honesty in the Manual for Teachers opens with the connection between honesty and trust. And trust, of course, was the last trait that we covered. It says all other traits of God's teachers rest on trust. Once that has been achieved, the others cannot fail to follow. Only the trusting can afford honesty. And that's really interesting. So let's talk about the connection between honesty and trust. But maybe at a bit of a twist, how do you think dishonesty and mistrust are connected?
Yeah, I think that what happens is, first of all, we don't trust the world. We don't trust that it's all governed by the Holy Spirit, by a benevolent power. And so, not trusting the world, we think we have to kind of lie our way through it, fudge on the truth, deceive, or we won't be safe. We won't get our needs met. So, as a way of controlling, of like wrangling a wild world, we think lies are part of how you do that. Okay. And I know that you expressed disbelief about this, but I have read studies that show that people lie a couple, three times in a 10-minute period.
Yeah, I mean,
They
I hope
set
you
these
have
up.
some facts on that. Like, I hope you have some data to back that up, because that
Yeah,
just
I
sounds
know.
crazy.
I should have looked it up. But it's a test. They put participants together and so on. They have them talk for 10 minutes. Anyway, the point is that we lie more frequently than we realize. And what this section is really implying is if we trusted that the world was orchestrated by a benevolent power, then we could just tell the truth and let the chips fall where they may.
Shouldn't we always do that anyway?
We should, but I think we're always calculating the cost, and we think the cost is going to be too great because we don't trust the world.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying though. If we don't trust that there is a benevolent higher power in charge of what happens in this world and in our lives, then we feel like it's just us in our tiny little bodies trying to make our way in this great big world full of bad actors. And
Right.
so how are we going to get through that without fudging things here and there to make ourselves look better so that we can survive?
Right. And I think this goes back to the point we made last week, which is the 10 characteristics. Many of them are echoed in all kinds of traditional lists of virtues in different religions. Okay. But trust doesn't tend to make the list. And so I think what the course would say is, yeah, you need those other virtues. They're good, but you'll fall short of them unless you have that foundation of trust. You'll be thinking, I should be perfectly honest. I should be absolutely tolerant. But unless you have that foundation of trust, you're not going to actually get past the should.
Mm-hmm. Gosh, there's so much there. There's so much there. But I just, rather than like going more deep into it, I just want to park on that point that if you really trust that there's a higher power at work. It's for your good. All things work together for the good of all. Then you can afford to be honest because you trust. And it's
Right.
when you don't trust that you're kind of running around like the squirrel, and you, what's the inevitable result of not trusting but being dishonest. Yeah. Okay. So
Okay.
he, as we've been saying, it's a matter of internal consistency versus internal conflict. Again, we have so much internal conflict in our thoughts. So you mentioned earlier that the term honesty actually means consistency. And then there's another line that says, such are the truly honest. At no level are they in conflict with themselves. And so let's talk about that, because how do we unwind all of this conflict that's happening within our own minds?
Yeah, I think that what he talks about as consistency versus conflict is probably for us more understandable if we put it as a matter of internal contradictions. Do we have internal contradictions? I think that's language that kind of conveys more directly to us what he's trying to convey here. So let's face it, we are all bundles of contradictions. We know some truth, we hold some ideal in one part of our mind, and in some other part of our mind, we can't keep hold of that ideal or live up to it or really fully face that truth. And once I came up with, okay, it's internal contradictions, I looked online for just articles about this, and I found a great one. It's called, and this guy ultimately comes out, I think, in favor of contradictions. He says, how our contradictions make us human and inspire creativity. Sounds very positive. He's a professor of anthropology named David Berliner. And the article opens with these sentences. Have you ever wondered how many contradictory thoughts you have in a day? How many times your thoughts contradict your actions? I mean, he's talking like the Course here, how often your feelings oppose your principles and beliefs. Most of the time, we don't see our own contradictions. It's often easier to observe such inconsistencies in others, but you are as full of contradictions as I am. Then a bit later, he gives these examples, okay? And they're good examples. Think about buying technological gadgets while opposing child labor and ecological waste, or about condemning theft, then illegally downloading music and movies. Think about those who hold forth about respecting private life and a moment later post personal photos to Facebook. There are environmentalists who constantly fly, finance traders who care about poverty, and sermonizing priests who've lost their faith. This last example is a great one. Sebastian Marroquin remembers his father singing lullabies while he drifted off to sleep. And his father was the drug lord, Pablo Escobar, the greatest killer in Colombian history. So that really captures, I think, this idea of what he's calling conflict. It's really about internal contradictions.
And we're absolutely full of those.
We are full of those. And they are a case of dishonesty, of self-deception, because one part of us knows or aspires to what the other part of us violates.
Yeah, and I love that he points out how much easier it is to see those contradictions in other people than ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
We're so clear on how other people are conflicted.
Yeah.
And when it comes to ourselves, we have a lot more leniency. So I would encourage us all to take a look at that. But let's talk about what the result is from this kind of internal conflict. Like, what happens in our lives as a result of just being so conflicted inside?
Well, one thing he points out in the discussion of honesty here is the conflict within ourselves spills over and produces conflict with others. And he doesn't really say how, but based on the rest of the course, I think what's going on probably is this, based on, his idea of projection. we have these two things in us. Let's say we aspire to the ideal. And this author we just read mentions a few cases of that. And then some other part of us can't live up to that. So what we are prone to do is take the second part, the part that can't live up to it, and project it onto other people. And we keep the first part, the ideal we aspire to. So now we become the person who's full of noble, high ideals, and they become the people who just don't live up to those. And once you have that, there will be conflict, without a doubt.
Yeah, I mean, that's just classic projection in the course, right? Like we're feeling guilty about something or another, and we project it onto other people, and then they're the bad guy so that we can be the innocent one. And that's rife with its own conflicts. And then also, I mean, I like what you're saying about these ideals. Like we hold, if you're on a spiritual path, you hold a certain ideal. If you're a course student, forgiveness is the central teaching in the course. You hold an ideal of unconditional forgiveness. Who is there? And so now we're conflicted between the spiritual ideal and what we're feeling inside. And on it goes. And so I think that the conflict that we're constantly facing in our own mind is spilling out all the time in all of our relationships. And we wonder why the world is so toxic. Like we don't have it right in our own head. And because of that, we can't get our relationships right. And because of that, no one can seem to function together anymore.
And if you think about, we've got these two things in our minds. Let's say we have the ideal we aspire to, and we have the part of us that can't fully admit and be honest with that can't live up to it. If you have those two things in you, you're going to want to cleanse yourself. You're going to want to see that second part out there in other people. You're going to want to see only the first part in yourself. That's going to feel like it makes you clean. Okay. And then once you do that, you're the good guy, they're the bad guys, and you're in conflict.
So that conflict, that perpetual conflict in our lives is the result of that internal inconsistency. What is the result of internal consistency?
Good question. And this is super important and relevant. What he says in the beginning of the second paragraph of the honesty section is this: the peace of mind which the advanced teachers of God experience is largely due to their perfect honesty. And that, I think, makes total sense for us on an emotional level. What I've done in the past is have people go through a thought experiment in which they imagine that they have those 4 different descriptions that he gives of honesty that we read earlier. So I just think it would be good to do that now. So if you're a listener and you can do this, if you're in a place where you can maybe close your eyes, imagine you have these 4 kinds of honesty. Imagine there is nothing you say that contradicts what you think or what you do. Imagine that no thought of yours opposes any other. Imagine that no act belies your word. You always keep your word. And imagine that no word of yours lacks agreement with another. Is there a feeling that comes out of imagining those 4 things? What I've found in the past when I've done that is I feel, to the extent I can get in touch with those possibilities, I feel a sense of wholeness. I feel really like everything in me is one whole. And obviously, what comes along with that is a sense of peace, of being at peace with myself, because nothing in me is warring with anything else in me. So the outcome of perfect honesty is peace of mind. The great prize, it seems to me, that we are all seeking on the spiritual path, we're all hoping for inner peace. Who thought that inner peace would come from this perfect honesty or ultra integrity?
Yeah, I love the idea. I think that to picture that nothing you say contradicts what you think is beautiful. The problem is that what we say is typically perfectly in alignment with what we think. It's just that what we think is out of joint with truth. So we say the thing that we think, and it gets us in trouble. It's the thinking, it all comes back down to the thoughts and where you stand with those. If you're thinking that this other person is guilty and doesn't deserve forgiveness and this, that, and the other, then your thoughts are going to lead to your behaviors and words. But if you can get it right at the level of thought, then perhaps your words and behaviors will follow suit from there.
Yeah, I think so. But I do want to add that I think that society itself kind of depends upon us holding back the beast within and portraying in our behavior something that's better than what we're thinking. There's that section in the text above the battleground. It's all about how we try to protect ourselves from the attack within us by putting a better front out there.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, there's the idea that, justifying his savagery with smiles as he attacks. Like, we're so good at having attack within us, finding a way to express it, a way that masks the attack and makes it seem nice and friendly, right?
Yeah. I mean, that whole idea of holding back the beast within, that's it. To the extent that our quote unquote honesty rests on just our ability to pretend like we're good, then we're in trouble.
Yeah.
But to the extent that our honesty rests in that unconflicted state where our thoughts are pure and our words and our behaviors follow from those pure loving thoughts, then I think the world could reach a different place at last.
Oh my God. Yeah, completely.
All right. Well, let's move on to tolerance. Tolerance is our next trait, and we know what tolerance is. Tolerance is a willingness to accept and permit the existence of different opinions, different behaviors, different cultural habits, different likes and dislikes. However people choose to live their lives is okay. Tolerance is the ability to be okay with differences, and it feels like we are living in a very intolerant world. So
Oh my God, yeah.
how do we I don't want to say like how did we get to this intolerant world? I think we all know the answer to that. Hate and othering. But how do we get to the place of tolerance?
Just before speaking to that, I just realized it always struck me that in the original dictation, now in the CE, early in the course, Jesus extols that principle, live and let live. And that's tolerance, right? We are having a hard time living and letting live. It's another way of saying that our world's full of intolerance.
Yeah, that's a good connection. If Jesus is like live and let live, why can't we follow suit on that as well?
Yeah. I think he has some ideals we haven't managed to live up to.
Yeah, good point.
So the big answer in this is only one paragraph, the section on tolerance, but the big answer is non-judgment. If we can refrain from judging, we will be tolerant.
So big connection between non-judgment and tolerance. Do you want to say more about that?
Yeah, well, the connection's so big that in the actual paragraph describing tolerance, the word tolerance is not mentioned. It's only in the heading. Um, it, but in that paragraph,
That's kind of funny.
judgment, isn't it? Yeah. In that paragraph, judgment and judge are mentioned 11 times. So the implication is obvious. Non-judgment is the road to tolerance. If you don't judge, you will be tolerant. And I think that's not surprising. It makes intuitive sense to all of us.
Yeah, and there's a connection here between non-judgment and honesty as well. The section starts by saying God's teachers do not judge. To judge is to be dishonest, or to judge is to assume a position you do not have. So let's talk about how judging is being dishonest here.
It's a great point, I think. What he's saying when he says to assume a position you don't have, he's saying that when you judge, you're acting like you're in a position to, like when you judge a person, to know. You're acting like you're all knowing. You know you're not all knowing, but you go ahead and judge anyway, thereby acting like you're all knowing. And there's a great statement of this in lesson 243 in the workbook, where he says, I will be honest with myself today. I will not think that I already know what must remain beyond my present grasp. I will not think I understand the whole from bits of my perception, which are all that I can see. So there he's saying, if you're honest, you'll realize that if you're just looking out through your eyes, you are not going to be able to really understand the whole. So there again, judgment or non-judgment and honesty are strongly linked.
Yeah. And there's that contradiction again. We're constantly in this state of inner conflict. Only here it is in the tolerance section, but it's judging and not judging. I mean, we're in that conflict as well. So
yeah, I mean, he has just said that honesty is about one part of you not really being honest about what the other part of you believes or knows. And it's the exact situation here where one part of you says, I know I'm not all knowing. I know I'm not in a position to judge. And another part of you says, I'm the judge. I know exactly what's what. That's the contradiction. And that's internal self-deception, dishonesty.
Right. And then if we deceive ourselves, then how can it not spill out into all the different ways that we interact with other people? And so it goes here.
Right.
So we have this conflict. We know somewhere we're not in a position to judge, but we do it anyway. And this is all connected to trust as well. So in the section, it says judgment implies a lack of trust, and trust remains the bedrock of the teacher of God's whole thought system. Let this be lost, and all his learning goes. So I love that. Judgment implies a lack of trust, and trust is the bedrock of the teacher of God's whole thought system. So if you trust, then you have no need to judge because you know God's got it.
Right. I think that it doesn't take much thought to see how when you don't trust the world, you need your judgment, right? You need to decide who are the good guys, who are the bad guys, who's part of your tribe, who's not part of your tribe. You need to constantly evaluate so that you can filter out those things and those people that are likely to hurt you. Okay. So we are constantly judging basically to evaluate who we can trust and who we can't trust. So it's only when we lack that total trust he's talking about that we feel that need to judge and filter for the sake of self-protection.
Yeah, this is where we get into the difference between judgment and discernment. You do need to be discerning here in these bodies, and you absolutely do need to figure out who it is that you can trust and who you can't. You need to make decisions for your own personal safety and comfort and all that stuff. We're not saying that that's not applicable here.
Right. The next email you get from a Nigerian source, you just go with it.
right, or from wherever else, someone saying that they have $50 million to give you. I get those from all over the world.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, what would you say to someone who's like, okay, I get that non-judgment means that I can be more tolerant, and I want to be more tolerant, but I do need to discern in this world. I do need to have some form of judgment here. So what would you say to anyone who's confused about that idea?
Yeah. Well, I think that there's kind of two levels here. One level is figuring out people's, you know, specific agendas so that you know how to respond to them. That has to be done. I do think that we often go astray because we are responding to them from the wrong voice in us, right? And I think if we are in touch with that higher voice in us, the Holy Spirit, we will be led astray less often. So, on that behavioral level, what to do, whether to say yes to someone's proposal, I don't mean marriage, but inclusive of that, um, we need discernment there. But on a deeper level, on an emotional level, I think that there's a way in which we can throw the filters away. We can just not judge and have the same kind of complete and total unmodulated emotional stance toward everyone and everything.
One thing you find if you have clear guidance, one of the ways to tell if it's legitimate is when it's free of that harsh condemning judgment. I mean,
Mm,
we've all received guidance that says walk away from this situation or whatnot, and you're still making a decision in the world, but it's just not full of the scorn and whatnot that we tend to apply when it's our own judgment on a situation.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, yeah, I think that that's how guidance works. If you get the real stuff, it's not dripping with judgment, but it does have a lot of insight.
Yeah, yeah. So, and it's not naive,
It's
right?
not naive,
It's not
right?
naive. And I think that's what we're afraid of. We're afraid that if we're not in the judger's seat, then the behaviors that we take in the service of being unconditionally loving will be unwise. But that's
Yeah,
not the case. You can still discern, you can still say, I'm no longer available for this, but you don't have to heap it with all the hate and whatnot that we put on top of these things. So you
yeah.
mentioned before that this section has an image of throwing away the filters, and I just wanted
Hmm.
to read that piece of it.
Mm,
So it says, without judgment are all things equally acceptable, for who could judge otherwise? Without judgment are all men brothers, for who is there who stands apart? So that's beautiful. Without judgment are all things equally acceptable. And I know, yeah, I'm so glad we had the conversation about, discernment just a minute ago, because I'm
yeah.
sure there's a lot of people who hear that line, without judgment are all things equally acceptable, and would think, well, wait a minute, there's some things I just can't accept. So let's talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, the logic is pretty clear. If you unhook your judgment, which judges one thing acceptable and the other thing not acceptable, then you don't have a faculty anymore for judging one thing more acceptable than another. Everything becomes equally acceptable. The second line about all men being brothers is, I think, a little bit more complicated. What the Course says in another place is that to be the judge requires that you stand apart. And this is from the text in chapter 24. It says, judgment must come from someone, quote unquote, better, someone incapable of being like what he condemns, quote, above it, sinless by comparison with it. So the judge is assumed to be, standing apart and free of all the stuff he's judging.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So if judgment entails standing apart and you don't judge, then you don't stand apart. And if you don't stand apart, everyone's your brother.
That's so good.
Isn't it?
That's amazing. I love that idea. One thing that I feel grounded in from all the work that I did in mindful leadership is the concept of letting things happen without judging them. I'm not anywhere near where I need to be, but I love this story that you have. I don't know if it's true or not, but it's someone, some guru somewhere who was accused of fathering a child, and so the mother comes and says, "This is your baby," and he's like, "Is that so?" So
Right.
he raises the baby, and then like a few years later or whatnot,
I think it's like a year.
the mother comes back and says, "It's not your baby," and he's like, "Is that so?" And he like lets the baby go. And I can't even imagine how, I mean, what it would be to live in that way. I wish I had more of it, but
Mhm.
I do love the idea that things can just pass and we don't have to put our layers of judgment on them. But I especially love the idea that when everything is equally acceptable, then we don't have that faculty to judge anymore, as you were saying, and then everyone becomes your brother, because it's the judgment that is the wall, and then
Yeah.
they're not your brother anymore. And so without that wall, then we're seeing each other truly, and that's just a really beautiful idea.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So I know we've got to wrap up here. Let's talk about the commonality between honesty and tolerance. Where do they overlap?
I think you can really feel the commonality because in both, you're basically letting go of the level of control that you normally absolutely depend on. Okay. So with honesty, you are telling the truth and letting the chips fall where they may, rather than carefully controlling how much truth you let out, carefully controlling, injecting certain falsehoods in so you can get your way in the world. So with honesty, you're letting go of control. With tolerance, it's the same thing, because what you're doing is you're no longer putting up those filters of judgment that say, okay, you get to come in, you get to stay out, you have to stay out, because otherwise I won't be safe and protected. Again, you're letting go of that control process. And so I think both of them, they have that commonality where we aren't like constantly managing, manipulating our world so that it behaves the way we want. So we're safe, so we get our way.
Yeah, and here we have a more clear understanding of why he says that trust is the foundation for all the other traits. Because if you trust, you can be honest. If you trust, you can be tolerant. And what a beautiful way to live. So I love the idea that trust is at the core of these things, and we could behave so much differently in this world if we really understood how central that is to our lives.
Yeah. Yeah. I love this insight that I think is implicit here, that we can want to be perfectly honest and want to be truly tolerant and want the rest of the characteristics, want gentleness and defenselessness and generosity forever, but they're going to remain distant ideals until we trust.
Yeah, and just speaking of tolerance on that level, I mean, so much of why we're seeing the hate in the world, the polarization and division that we're seeing as we're recording this, we're 2 days out from the shooting at the LGBTQ plus club in Colorado Springs. There, that shooting is the result of intolerance.
It sure
These
seems that way.
people don't have
Yeah.
a right to exist. And if we just get back to trust, then you understand that everybody should love everybody and live and let live. And there's enough here for all. And we're all equal in the eyes of God. And so if you understand those basic principles that rest on you trust, you can be tolerant and love as a result. It's when you think that there's not enough for everybody that you shrink and become hateful and want to demonize, and then the violence is the result of that.
Well, and then you see it's you're not trusting that the world's governed by a loving higher power. You are ripping and tearing the world for the sake of getting it into the shape you want it to be.
Yeah. And that's the thing, the shape you want it to be.
Yeah.
And we need to think beyond that to what God wants it to be.
Yeah.
And God wants it to be a place where everybody is loving everybody. So, Robert, is there anything else that you wanted to say on these two traits before we close?
Well, I think the way he's painted them, yes, they're extreme, right? Honesty, as he portrays it, super extreme. Tolerance is extreme as well, because everything becomes equally acceptable. Everyone becomes your brother. That's extreme, right? And yet, there's clearly something so attractive. There's something attractive in the peace that comes from honesty. And there's something attractive in just taking the filters down and embracing everyone and accepting everything that is part of tolerance.
Yeah, and Jesus really demonstrated that in the last moments of his life, didn't he? I mean, you were saying that when you trust, your tolerance of absolutely everything, and that's the extreme version of it, the most extreme version.
Right.
You're tolerant of everything, so you don't judge, and then everyone's your brother. And so I'm just trying to think of like the worst case scenario of that, and it would be murder.
Mm-hmm.
And Jesus demonstrated through his own murder in "Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do," that you can even be in that place and be tolerant.
Yeah.
And he was tolerant because he trusted in God.
That's
And
a really extreme tolerance.
it's the most extreme, but that's okay, because it gives us something to aspire to.
Yeah, that takes the "is that so" from the story you just told and just like chucks it way
Oh, I
off
know,
into
right?
the distance.
It's like, I'm getting flogged. Is that so? I'm carrying my own cross. Is that so? Oh, they're nailing me to it. Is that so? And I I don't know if Jesus went through it with that kind of levity, but just his words and the way that he writes about the crucifixion and the course let us know that it's possible. I mean, he even says, I can demonstrate what's potential in you. So we all have this capacity to have the most radical versions of these traits. We don't have to think, I can never get there. We can, but we probably won't in this lifetime. But hey, aim at the moon and land at the stars. If you hold it up as an ideal, and even if you don't get the extreme of that ideal, you're at least better off than you would have been if you didn't try.
Yeah. The
So
point is to start walking and keep walking.
yeah. Okay, Robert, thanks so much for another good conversation. We'll continue next week with the next two traits of gentleness and joy. Gentleness is one of my favorites, and I know yours as well. So looking forward to another good discussion, and bye for now.